The Never Quit Podcast, sponsored and hosted by Quotes Jungle, with your host, Quote.
Welcome to the Never Quit Podcast. In the studio with me, I have Lainie Hodges. How you doing, Lainie?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. Do you believe in daily routines?
I do believe in daily routines, mainly because that's how I'm able to function at my best. I've discovered that I'm just a person that likes routines, and it helps set me up for my day, for my week. I try not to be too rigid with them, have some flexibility in it. However, it is something that I try to stick to as much as possible.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you remember your routine this morning?
Absolutely. So I wake up and I either meditate, throw on a meditation while I'm still laying in bed, or often I'll get up first and I do something called oil pulling. So I use coconut oil and swish it around in my mouth for 5 minutes and then spit it out. It's something that helps to keep the teeth healthy and pull out any sort of intoxication, something like that might be in your body. And then I rinse with lemon water and then drink some lemon water and then do my coffee and sit down and meditate if I haven't done that already. So that's my consistent routine to start out my morning. And then it kind of depends from there what I choose to engage in. Usually I'll hop online and kind of check my social media, do my posts for my company every day, post that on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. That's my routine. I might check out a little bit of news. I try to be really mindful of how much I consume. At the same time, I do want to remain informed about what's going on in the world. And I kind of check out what my friends are doing on social media as well. And then from there, I typically will work out either at home or I might go to a gym class and then get into my work day.
For those who don't know, we're in Denver, Colorado. Well, actually filming in Arvada, Colorado. When I say New York, what comes to your mind? Let's talk New York right away.
Ooh, New York, my love. That's what comes to mind. New York has been one of the most influential places in my life. I like to think that New York was one of my master's degrees in life, and even though I didn't go to school there. But what I learned there shaped me into who I am in really tremendous ways. I had great experiences in New York City, some tough ones, of course, too. Every day in New York is going to teach you a lesson. I'm very grateful for those lessons. The opportunities that I had, particularly in the sports world, were really impactful, though, and created my business that I have today and who I am today.
Where are you from originally?
Born and raised in Denver.
Let's talk about what led you to New York.
So I went to Manual High School for high school here in Denver, and both of my older sisters had gone away for college, and I knew that was something I wanted to do. I didn't want to go to CU. I was afraid my mom might come knock on the door and surprise me. So I also was looking for really good sports to watch, not to play. I was never that great of an athlete, although I do love sports. I work in sports, obviously I love it. And I wanted a sports medicine program. So I looked at a number of schools on the East Coast. I also looked at Arizona State. That was going to be my backup school. And I took a trip to Syracuse University, and it was October. It was beautiful. The leaves were changing. The weather was warm. And I was like, this is it. This is where I want to go. So I applied early and got in early. And then when I was a junior, we took a trip to New York City for spring break. And it was my first time being down there, and we stayed on the Lower East Side for a week, and I just fell in love. There was something about the city that just called me there, and I knew that at some point I needed to live there.
Where did your love come for sports?
I think it's being raised in my family. My mom is originally from Ohio, and she is a fired up Buckeye fan. She went to Ohio State. And then my dad, he enjoys sports, but I don't think he's quite the fanatic that I am, or one of my sisters or my mom. But he always had Broncos tickets growing up. So we grew up going to Broncos games. And obviously those were the years of John Elway. We went to a number of Super Bowls, even though we never won those ones. And I just fell in love with football at that point. We grew up skiing. My parents had me on skis by the time I was 3. And I also played tennis growing up and field hockey as well. So I just loved sports, the competitive aspect of it, the team building aspect of it. And it was something that I knew I wanted to create a career in somehow, some way. Originally, I thought that was going to be athletic training. And when I was at Syracuse, I took that class. And we got to the point where we talked about compound fractures, where the bone actually comes out of the skin. And sitting in that class, I was like, nope. That is not something I can deal with running out on the field. So that was a redirection into physical therapy and studying that. And I had an internship here in physical therapy at CU Sports Med after my junior year. And in that experience, I discovered I don't want to be a physical therapist either, because it's more like coaching to me, where you're trying to get people to be motivated to do their exercises. And that's just not quite where my gifts lie. What I noticed in that experience, though, is there were some people who came in, did their exercises, had a great attitude, did their exercises at home as well. And then other people who came in and complained, didn't do their work at home, and their recovery times were extremely different. So then that steered me towards sports psychology and the psychology of injury recovery, and that's how I got into that field.
Awesome. You described a lot of things that you love. What do you describe for yourself as self-love?
Self-love. That is something that I didn't understand, I'd say, until my 30s. That was something I really struggled with growing up. And self-love to me now is being able to maintain that routine that I talked about earlier, which is a way that I take care of myself. If I don't have that, I think that I just generally don't feel as good. So maintaining my routines, maintaining boundaries with people, and making sure that I am honoring myself and loving myself as much as possible. Because again, that was something I really struggled with before. I had lots of feelings of doubt, and I'm not good enough, and I'm not smart enough, and all those things that we can tell ourselves. So being able to acknowledge in the moment when that's happening and acknowledge it, recognize it, and then speak something different to myself. Because none of those things are true. I am good enough. I am smart enough. I am capable. We all are. So we have to be mindful of the stories we tell ourselves.
Explain to the people why you do the line of work that you do.
So I work in the athlete development space now. I do have a training and background in sports psychology. And the reason that I work in that field, in part, there was a course I took in grad school out in San Diego. I was there for about a year and a half, and it was athletic transition. And in that class, they taught us about the struggles that athletes have when they are transitioning out of sport. So your identity, especially the way that we treat elite athletes in this country, your only identity is that you're a great athlete, and that's to the detriment of other parts of yourself. So when the sport is no longer there, and this is similar if you were in any sort of career path where you're kind of told where to be and what to do day after day for years. So military has similar challenges as well. But once you don't have that anymore, athletes are often left to wonder, like, wait, who am I? Because my identity is wrapped up in what I did on the field or the court, wherever that may be. So as a lifelong fan, I felt that there's a way in which I contribute to that, and I wanted to do something about it. So that's what really motivated me to get into the athlete development space, because I want to help athletes grow other parts of themselves, not just the athletic piece. And the work that I do, thankfully, gets to work on both at the same time. So that's part of why it's so powerful.
If you could, share with the people some of the NFL teams or NFL team that you have worked with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have worked with the Seahawks, the Raiders, the Broncos, the Chiefs, the Lions, the Ravens, the Packers, the Giants, the Falcons. I have to sort of picture the map of the U.S. in my head. I think that covers the ones that I've worked with so far. And then I presented at the NFL Player Engagement Annual Meeting. So I have been able to work with someone from each team in some sort of capacity. But those are the teams that I currently go out and travel to for trainings either in the spring or in the fall. It's kind of a mix depending on what the needs are of the team.
For those not familiar with the kind of work that you do, basically give us a small little tune or summary of what you offer when you do that kind of line of work.
The athlete development space is the field where you are trying to help athletes grow holistically, not just that athletic piece. So you want them to be successful men and women when they are performing, as well as when they're at home, when they're retired. You want them to be able to take advantage of all the opportunities that come to them. So you're trying to develop the whole person. And that's the point of athlete development. In the NFL world, it's called player engagement. It used to be called player development, but they rebranded it to player engagement a number of years ago. So they're all the same thing: athlete development, player engagement. So what I do, my company is Improv Alchemy, And I use improv games and exercises to create environments where people can learn and grow and develop as human beings. So I go into these teams and we play improv games. And a lot of people are like, oh, that's acting or make believe. And that's also a misnomer as well. Improv is actually a form of principles and tools that you can use to help people learn, grow, and develop. It can create a show like Whose Line or Wild and Out, or if you go to a show in your local city and see people performing on stage. The principles of improv create that show. The principles of improv also help a team bond more quickly. They help to build trust. It helps improve communication. So there's a lot of different ways that it can impact individuals and the group at the same time. And those same skills help them when they're playing as well.
In doing that line of work, when was the first time, if you can remember, where you're like, I know what I'm doing?
Because there are doubts, right?
Absolutely.
I would say the first time, the first NFL client that I had were the Baltimore Ravens, and I was able to land that session with them because I used to work at the league office in New York City. That was the last position I held before I moved back to Denver. So I worked in the player engagement department. I was a coordinator. My responsibility was to basically be a liaison between half of the teams, and then there was another coordinator that had the other half. So the Ravens were one of my teams. I had built a relationship with their player engagement director at the time. His name was Harry Swain. And I sent out a one sheet to about 5 teams that I thought would be open to improv. And Harry was one of the people that responded. He put me through the ringer on the phone for about 40 minutes, and then he hired me. And what I loved about his approach to it is he decided, rather than holding that training at the facility, he wanted to rent out the Hippodrome Theater in downtown Baltimore. So it's always a field trip every year. And we went down there, had the session. Of course, it's hard for me to read in the moment, like how people are receiving it. And then we had a debrief call the following day, and he was really just blown away by the work. So that's what showed me, like, I am onto something here. And it's just grown from there.
Let's talk about some of the doubts, if you're willing to do that. We all have them in our lines of work. Share that with people so they can be engaged and understand we all go through it.
Absolutely. It's a part of just being human, is you're going to doubt yourself from time to time. And that can be in the moment, that can be after the fact. It's just something that I think we all generally need to contend with. So I think the way that I deal with it is I try and not be really wedded to certain expectations or certain outcomes, particularly when it comes to improv. Because oftentimes I'll find I can have an intention and certain things I'd like to get across in the session, and those things do get across. And then I find out that there are all sorts of other things that get created in those moments that are helpful to athletes and the people that are charged with supporting their growth and development. So I think being open to things maybe looking different than you're anticipating or you're expecting is important. If you're really wedded to it looking a certain way, you're going to miss all the other ways in which it shows up. And that's true of a lot of things in life, just being open and receptive. So I think I just really try and believe in myself and my mission. My goal here is not to just make a ton of money and work with athletes because it's cool. I am genuinely invested in the success, the long-term success of athletes. And so that's why I do this work. And often I can't ever really know what that success is going to look like down the line because I only see them briefly, and I just have to trust that I'm planting seeds that might get through in that moment. And there is confirmation of that often in the debrief when they express. And it might not hit them for a couple of years, but the seed is planted. And as an educator as well, that's just something you have to trust in. So I think trusting the process, trusting your vision, trusting your mission, and doing your best work from there.
When you hear the term never quit, what comes to your mind?
Never quit. What comes to mind? I would say when I think of never quit, resiliency comes to mind. Even if things, again, don't turn out the way you planned or you were hoping for, you have to trust that the redirection in that is heading towards a better plan. So this journey for me, this is 9.5 years in the business. It has certainly not looked like I anticipated that it would when I decided to go out on my own. I've just trusted that if I stay true to who I am and what I'm trying to bring to the table, that eventually it's going to catch on and I'm going to find the right clients. Part of my journey too in Never Quit has been being able to accept the no's. you're going to get no's a lot of times in life, and you can't let those discourage you. That's just a redirection to another door. For my work, I find that there's a lot of organizations and teams that just aren't quite ready for what I do, although I would argue those are the teams that probably need my work the most. But I used to take it really personally when I got a no. Like, I wasn't good enough. My work's not good enough. And the clients that I do have showed me over and over again that that's absolutely not the case, because they continue to apply my work in different ways, in various ways. And so that has helped me to just take those no's and keep on pushing.
Respecting both parties. When working with male and females, which one would you say is more difficult to get your message across that you're trying to portray in your line of work?
That's an excellent question. I've largely, in my experience, worked with males. That's just sort of how my career has panned out. And I think there's a willingness to be a little bit more vulnerable off the jump with women as opposed to men. However, my work is also designed to support people to get to that more vulnerable place. And by vulnerability, I want to be clear what I mean. So to be vulnerable means to show up in a space, in a situation, without knowing what the outcome's going to be and just taking that risk anyways. Just trusting yourself in that moment, trusting you can handle it, trusting that whatever comes your way, you're going to be able to work with it skillfully. So that's what we work on in improv, and that's what we're doing in these games. And when we debrief, usually the men don't name vulnerability. There have been a few times, though, where it has been named, and I think the most beautiful part of what's happened in those moments is a player has named that's a skill that we've been using through our session, and then that has been celebrated really loudly and really encouragingly by the other players. And that's just a beautiful thing to see vulnerability be celebrated, and for them to recognize as well that vulnerability is a strength, because what comes before vulnerability is courage. And we know that courage is a strength. So if that's the foundation of vulnerability, vulnerability is a strength as well.
Ego. What comes to mind when you hear ego?
People. We all have ego. It gets in our way all the time. I think, depending on sort of how, in the athletic world, how you've been raised, ego can play a bigger part. Like if you've been told all your life, like, you're so great and you're wonderful, and you've never been told no, like, you might have a huge ego. It depends on who else has been around you to influence you. But I always remember, I wasn't the coordinator on the program, but there was a very elite program that the NFL still runs, and you have to apply, you have to submit video. It's very competitive to get into this program, limited spots. So my counterpart received a call from someone who had applied who was denied to the program. And he literally said to her, "I don't understand. I've never been told no before." And this is someone who's, 25 years old. Imagine being 25 and you have never once in your life been told no. So his ego took a hit that day. And I hope that when our ego gets hit, we're able to see that this is a learning opportunity if we choose to take it, rather than just be in our feelings and hurt about it. I'm always looking for ways that I can grow from things, whether they're experiences or situations that I like or I don't like. I think it's all there for our growth if we choose to believe that.
In developing your line of work, did you take your model from anything, or did you develop that yourself?
I did take the model from an organization in New York City that is called the All Stars Project. Maybe not necessarily the model, but the philosophy. So they are a youth development nonprofit, and they've been in the business for 35, 40 years in New York City, using improv and performance as a way to help young people grow from underserved communities. So I volunteered at their talent shows, and that's where kids could come, audition, and then if they made it into the show, they had to come back for a workshop the following week, and then the performance would be the week after that. So in the workshop portion, where the kids had to come back, those who made the show, what they also didn't know is if you had the guts to get on the stage and audition, you're in the show. So that's rewarded. So in the workshop piece, they had all of us doing improv as a way to help build the group, help people grow, build relationships. And I experienced that personally in myself. And I was like, oh, this feels good. There's something to this. So that's where I discovered improv as a developmental tool. And then at that time, I was also working as a mental training consultant and working with a baseball team up at GW High School in Wash Heights and some other individual athletes. And I was getting supervision from a sports psychologist at the time, just because you should always be getting support in your work. So she recommended using improv as a team building tool for a soccer team that I actually worked with. And so I was like, all right, I'll give this a shot. Created a little workshop with games for about 45 minutes. And then that coach, when I reached out to him the next day just to get his feedback, how did things go after the workshop? And he said they've never played as fluidly as they did after 45 minutes of improv with you. I was like, oh, okay, I think this works. So I actually left the NFL in 2011, right after the lockout hit, because I was tired of New York, tired of that rat race. I wanted to get back into schools because I had been working as an academic coach at Abraham Lincoln High School in Coney Island prior to that. My boss at the league office at that time was Troy Vincent, and he's probably the most intuitive person I've ever known in my life. And he just kind of called me on it one day. He was like, you're not happy here. You would rather be back in schools. You're tired of New York. He just read me. And I was like, you're absolutely correct, Troy. And the beautiful thing about Troy is he could have been like, all right, well, go figure it out. Like, we don't need you here anymore. But instead, even in that moment, he turned around and made a phone call to who I need to confirm this with him. But I think he called John Bailey, Musa Bailey's father, and asked him if he knew any positions in Denver that were open and available. He didn't on that phone call, but then Troy walked me the whole way home. And part of that is he was doing an education initiative and working with current players and former players like Ray Lewis, Jim Brown, Tony Dungy, who were trying to make an impact in dropout prevention. So I was coordinating all those efforts for him, and he invited me to a conference in Philly, a Dropout Prevention Network conference. So we went down there, and I went to one of the presentations was by someone from DPS, and I met a guy in that presentation who was just very curious why anyone from the NFL would be at this conference, and explained to him what we were trying to do. I also explained to him that I was trying to get back to Denver, and I thought the only way that I could do that was to be a teacher. So I was in the Teaching Fellows program at that point. And he said, no, I've got another option for you. And he talked to me about the Gear Up program, which is a pre-collegiate program where you're trying to advise students on the path to college. And I came home for a visit and had an interview, and actually just a meeting with the executive director. I never formally interviewed for it. Just in our conversation, he just said, listen, if you're willing to walk away from the NFL to come back to schools, like, you're hired. So that pathway would not have happened without Troy, without question. So I love looking back on my career because it's all just been a series of dots that have connected. And I think that's how life is. Like, it's kind of like riding a train. It's moving forward, but you're seated facing back, and you can see all the dots connecting behind you. You can't really see them in front of you. You just have to trust the process and be open to what comes your way so that you can get to the right place. That's definitely been a part of my journey.
Let's go back on your life when you were a waitress in New York.
Yes.
Let's talk about that experience a little bit.
Number one, I'm going to recommend, so for all of you with kids out there, I waited tables at California Pizza Kitchen. Now, that started at the Cherry Creek Mall here in Denver after I graduated college. I worked there. I was living with my parents, and I saved up money to go to Costa Rica and South America for 6 months so that I could learn Spanish. And then from that point, I went to grad school in San Diego at the San Diego University for Integrative Studies. And while I was there, I worked at the California Pizza Kitchen at the Fashion Valley Mall. So the beauty of that is that I can walk in the door and say, hey, I already know how the systems work. I know the computer, the POS, so just hire me. And they did. And then I moved to New York City and immediately had a job at the California Pizza Kitchen there that used to be on the Upper East Side. So I highly recommend these sort of chain franchises where you could move to a different location and immediately have a job. So we'll start with that. Yes, when I first moved to New York, I was waiting tables on the Upper East Side, and that was, again, a dot that I couldn't see in the moment that would connect to my future, but I would not be where I am today if I had not worked there. No question.
Do you prefer hot or cold, and why?
I hate being cold and not being able to do anything about it. So personally, body temperature wise, I'd rather be hot than cold.
I've done a little bit of research. You have an obsession with helping education, youth, and people. Can you talk about that a little bit? Working with Emmanuel and the East Side and the development stuff that you've done in the past?
I am a very proud Thunderbolt graduate, class of 97. Both my older sisters went there, so my family was at Manual from 88 to 1997. And talk about another formative experience. I would not be who I am if I had not gone to Manual. I actually have no clue who I would be if I had gone somewhere else. I grew up in the country club neighborhood, down by the Cherry Creek Mall. Most of my neighbors went to private school. They went to Grayland, they went to Kent, they went to CA. My father didn't believe in paying taxes for public education and then paying tuition on top of that. So for us, it was like, no, you're going to public school. And that was during the era of busing. So I was able to walk to Bromwell, and then I was bused to Morey Middle School and bused to Manual High School. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. It really shaped who I am. I just had to learn how to navigate life a little bit more, I think, by going to those schools and figuring out how to get along with everyone. And we had a blast, too. Like, I think most Thunderbolts would gladly go back to high school for a day if they could. We still have fun at this age. Don't get it wrong. We got homecoming coming up, so looking forward to that. So,
you're a fan of hip hop, correct?
I am a fan of hip hop. I think that, again, came from going to Morey and to Manual, and it feeds my soul. Not only to listen to it, but to dance to it. That's something that really just makes me feel great to be able to go out and hear the music that you want to hear and be amongst community and everybody singing the words and just having a blast. Or at a concert, I just went to the Wu-Tang Nas De La Soul concert in Brooklyn the other week, and that was just a magical experience to see how it can bring so many people together and how much love people have for hip hop.
Do you remember your first experience with hip hop, or was it just...
I do. I have a memory of being in my TV room as a kid, and the Run DMC Aerosmith video came on, and they kicked through that wall, and I was like, whoa, what is happening here? This song is amazing. So that's a distinct memory. And then I also distinctly remember the Passing Me By video by Farside, and EPMD, because there was a boy I had a crush on who was big into EPMD, so he turned me on to them. And then freshman year, remember the Music Box channel? That Nothing But a G Thing song played, I think, every 30 minutes on the Music Box, so really got those lyrics down there. Yep.
Do you see any comparison to Wu-Tang in the line of work that you do? That's why I asked you about the comparison. That's where I thought you were going to go with it, even though respectfully you told honestly where you got it from.
Interesting.
Because look, they're a group that never broke up. They dance. They do a whole bunch of stuff. They've always been together. You probably never even thought about that.
I absolutely have not thought about it like that. Wu-Tang, interesting. And then I think about when I was at Manual, we used to cut school. A lot of people cut school back in the day.
Oh, yeah. I think people still do.
Absolutely. We would cut school, though, to go to a friend's house and memorize the lyrics to Liquid Swords. We were just dedicated to getting all those words down, particularly the speaking parts. So I've always had a huge love for Wu-Tang and affinity for them. I guess I've just never thought about that group aspect and how that might inform my work. I will say that it helps give me, I think, buy-in when I'm working with the people that I work in, when I can relate to them on that level. I'm very mindful of like what I wear into these sessions. You gotta wear the right shoes when you're working with NFL players. They often do point out though how clean my Air Force Ones are. And I get a new pair every spring. So it just, that visual gets the immediate buy-in, because I think a lot of people assume, and I've been asked this many times, is there a lot of resistance that you get to coming in there and saying like, hey guys, we're going to do improv. Like, does anybody fight that? And the interesting thing is, I think of the thousands of people that I've worked with over the years in athletics as well as in the education space, because I also do professional development for schools. I think I've had 3 people that have been super resistant. And one was only resistant because he wanted to drive his own car to the location, and he was told, no, you need to ride the bus with the rest of us. And he kind of got read the riot act at the beginning by the guy who hired me. Just basically like, listen, you don't have to be here. If you want to leave, you can leave. There will be consequences to that choice. So, of course, he stayed, participated. And then I found out when they got off the bus later, because I went straight to the airport, that when he was like, so what'd you think? How was it? It's like, that was cool. So I am typically able to overcome resistance. Any resistance I can't overcome actually is just revealing how that person tends to operate in general. So when I've debriefed with the client, said like, this person was really pushing back or like not wanting to participate, their response is like, gosh, that's who they are. And I think that's the power of what I do. And I know that's why a lot of teams bring me in, is because I'm creating this environment where you're allowed to really be yourself authentically, and you're going to show things that you don't show in other spaces. And so then that gives the people who work in player development and player engagement the opportunity to see that part of you and then make a note of it, and they can follow up with it later or engage with that in a different way. So I'm able to reveal things that they're just not going to come out in other spaces. And I actually was talking to a client about this last month. He said, there are things that happened in that session, ways that they showed up that I've never seen since, and I may not ever see again unless it's another workshop that they're doing with me. So that's part of why I love improv. It shows both your tendencies, the scripts that you can get caught in that maybe aren't serving you so well, while also giving you opportunity to do something different in the moment and try a different performance, which is required depending on your environment.
How do you want to be remembered?
Ooh, how do I want to be remembered? I want to be remembered as someone who was genuine and made a difference in the world. Someone that really helped people to grow and be their best selves. And I hope that not only am I leading that for people, but I'm also modeling that for people as well. I expect this of myself. I'm always looking for opportunities to grow. I'm not going to ask you to grow while I'm not asking myself to do the same. And I think that that's a lifelong process. But a lot of people can get it stuck in their heads that like, oh, once I reach a certain age, I'm grown. I can't change. This is who I am. And that's absolutely not true. We're always capable of change, no matter what age you are. And when we're willing to look for those opportunities, I think they show up.
What would you say is the most difficult thing in your line of work?
The most difficult thing.
That you're willing to share.
The most difficult thing in my line of work, I think it's difficult for people to wrap their brains around exactly what I do when it's just being described to them or they're reading about it. To experience it, then it clicks and connects immediately. I think as I try to bring improv into different athletic spaces where I don't necessarily have the relationships that I do at the NFL, I have run into a number of roadblocks in that. And I can't look at that as like, oh, my work's not good enough or I'll never get in there. I'm persistent. I keep trying. And I've even had clients say thank you for your persistence, for continuing to try. Because sometimes it takes these things years to line up. One of my NFL clients, I've been trying for 5 years to get him on board. And he finally did. And he'll be a client as long as he's there, and the one that can hire me. For other spaces, I'm running into a few more roadblocks. And I just trust that when it doesn't work out the way I planned, it's because there's a better plan that's on its way. And my vision is that I'm bringing this to as many leagues and as many sports as possible so that I'm helping people to grow and live full, successful lives. And I know at some point it's going to break. It's going to happen.
Name me 3 things in the world that you feel we can live without.
Doubt. We can live without doubt. We can let that go. Fear. I think we can let that go. It's going to be there. I think we can use that, though. I think there's a quote from the series with Dre and Jimmy Iovine, the Defiant Ones. And Jimmy Iovine says you have to be able, something like you have to use fear as a tailwind that pushes you forward rather than a headwind that holds you back. So we're going to have fear. It's going to pop up. I love recognizing when that fear occurs because to me, that's a signal that something great is on the other side. I want to be clear. I'm not saying that we want to do things that are unsafe. There's a difference between fearing something because it's unsafe versus fearing something because it's unfamiliar or uncomfortable. Being able to see that fear and let it go, I think that's something that's really important. And a third thing, I'll go back to music. Like, what is life without music? Especially in the pandemic. I think we learned that when we were all isolated and I was by myself at that point. I would not have mentally survived that if I didn't have music to get me through.
Who's the most influential person in your life right now thus far?
The most influential person in my life right now.
Here, dead or alive?
I think I'm going to take this back to my boss at the NFL, Troy Vincent. He really changed my life. He just opened me to some different ways of seeing and believing about how life can show up for you, how you can manifest in life. He's a deeply spiritual person. However, he's not someone that's going to throw that in your face. What he does is he just lives by example. And so I was able to watch him, see how he moved, and see how his faith and his belief and his spiritual side was very supportive in getting to him to where he is today. He would probably give all credit to that. But that just opened my eyes. I remember we had a conversation once in his office. I think he asked me if I believed in God, and I said no. And he was a little taken aback by that. I just didn't have a spiritual side to me at that point. And then when I moved back to Denver, I'd asked one of my former teachers at Manual for a book, like any recommendations to get back in education that he thought might be helpful to me. And he recommended A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, which is probably something that no one would expect. And I picked it up, and that really started my spiritual journey. And that's been an integral part of who I am from that point forward. So I wouldn't say I'm religious, but I am spiritual. I believe that there's something else out there that's supporting our journey. And I really try and lean into that, especially when I'm feeling doubt or fear or anxiety about how things might turn out. I just trust that everything is taken care of. And in doing that, I think that's how my career has been able to grow.
If you could come back as any animal or thing, what would you come back as?
I think it'd be amazing to fly. So maybe an eagle, like whatever the bird is that is least likely to get attacked by other birds. I feel like that might be a bald eagle, like they're the king of the skies. So I think I would go with that and just be able to fly everywhere. That'd be amazing. Although my favorite animal is an elephant.
Share with the podcast something that you've never shared publicly, if you're willing to share it with us.
Something I've never shared publicly. This is a tough question.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to ask you a couple tough questions.
Okay, something I've never shared. Because I tend to also be like a pretty open book, because I do believe that in sharing my story or in people sharing their own stories, we can recognize our story in somebody else. And when I've been able to do that, I often get feedback like, thank you for sharing that.
Okay, let's do this. Share with the people and me a time where you overcame fear.
A time when I overcame fear. I've had to overcome fear, and this has been newer because for a number of years I just didn't have my business in a place to travel internationally solo. But I have been able to in the past couple of years. So I went to Amsterdam for spring break a couple of years ago, and all by myself, didn't know anyone there. Definitely scary, terrifying. Once you land in the city and you get to the hotel and you're like, where am I? I'm like, thankfully they speak English there. They're first going to speak to you in their language, and then when you don't reply in that, then they'll switch to English. But I just remember that first probably 48 hours of just feeling really anxious about being by myself and being in a foreign country, and did I make the smart choice, so on and so forth. And I remember how exhilarating that was. I could feel that anxiety and fear in my body. And then as I just pushed through it and explored the city and went about my time, like by day 3, I was super comfortable. And so I've got another trip coming up. Next month, I'm going to go out to Germany for the Chiefs and the Dolphins game, because the Chiefs are my clients. And that's terrifying as well. Another foreign country. I think they mainly speak English. In addition to German, they speak English. So I don't think there'll be a huge language barrier. But I'm going by myself. And from Frankfurt, I'll go to Berlin and Munich, and I'll be by myself and just knowing that those are the developmental experiences that have been really impactful in my life. Like, I'm excited for that more than I am scared of it.
Convince people that think they don't need you why they might need you.
Well, I would say that one thing that came out of the pandemic, and the pandemic for my business, let me be clear, was terrifying, because overnight I lost a huge chunk of business because I couldn't fly in to see my clients. That was just before my spring NFL season was going to start. I had another big gig lined up with the WWE, and just like poof, all gone. So I had no income for a number of months, and it was really terrifying. And people were, going about their lives and converting their work to being online and getting really sick of Zoom meetings. And the trainings for NFL, like, those got tiring, being just, feeding information through a Zoom meeting. So the pandemic actually, I think, gave my work more value, because people recognize, like, I need to connect, I need to play, I need to laugh, I need joy, I need to have fun, I need to be creative. And so my work actually gained a ton of value during that period, and that helped my business to grow. So I think people thrive and can be healthier when they're feeling connected, when they experience joy, when they're laughing, because laughter is medicine, when they're using their brains in a different way, when they're experiencing themselves and others in a different way, when they're building trust, when they're being vulnerable, when they're being courageous. These are the building blocks, I believe, of having a fulfilling life. So my work does that in a really joyful, playful, and fun way. So if you want to be able to grow not only as a person, but as a unit, whatever that unit might be, whether it's a department, a team, an organization, and you want to do it in a way that sticks, so people carry what is learned in that session throughout their lives. Because it's not just what we do. It doesn't just impact your work in that moment. Like, the work that I do impacts all of your relationships in a positive way. So if you're looking for a way to really grow, learn, and have fun while doing it, nothing is more powerful than improv.
Tell the people how they can reach you and your website, etc.
My website is www.improvalchemy.com. So improvalchemy.com. Same thing on Instagram, same thing on Facebook. You can send me a message through my website. You can send me a message through any of the social media platforms, and LinkedIn as well, if you are interested in learning more about my work. I do want to clarify too, on improv, there's a tendency to think that it's about being funny, being a comedian, because we think of Whose Line Is It Anyways, or we think of an improv show. The reality is, improv is being able to take whatever resources you have available to you and being able to build and create with them, particularly when it's resources that maybe you don't like or that are limited. It's what you have to work with. So you can either fight against that and complain about it, or you can see the bigger picture, acknowledge what you're working with, embrace that, and then move forward and build something new. So it's also being able to think on your feet, off the top of the head. If you're acting, you have rehearsed lines that you're reciting. So if we look at it through that lens, we can see that we're actually improvising pretty much 100% of the day. We're all making it up as we go along, and no one got a script with their lines for the day. So everybody's already an improviser. There are ways that we can do it with more intention. And I think when we do that, we get further, we have more fun, we're more creative, and we're able to build bigger and greater things. So just to clarify a little bit what I mean by improv and why it's so powerful.
Last question. You're trapped in a room. What are the 3 songs on repeat in your headphones?
I'm going to go immediately. A Frank Ocean song is coming to my mind. So I think I'm going to go with, of course, the titles of the songs are slipping my mind, that they're on the Nostalgia album. The one where he's driving the car into the water. That's slipping my mind. That song, I'm going to go with my number 1 song of all time, Stevie Wonder, As. And I'm going to also go with Shaka Khan, Ain't Nobody. Top songs.
What's a word of encouragement for today?
Trust yourselves. Trust that you've got this. You have everything within you to get where you want to go. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that you need to work on, that you need to learn. It's to me, really about removing the blocks that we create in our lives to prevent us from maybe getting where we want to go. You've got everything within you. Trust that. Trust the process and be open to what comes your way. It's not going to look how you want it to look. You have to work with what you're working with rather than wanting something different. That's how you're going to get to wherever you're trying to go in life, be that career, be that relationships. Just be open. It's all there.
And for those who weren't listening, one more time before we exit out, tell them your name and where they can reach you.
Lainie Hodges, the owner and founder of Improv Alchemy. You can reach me at www.improvalchemy.com.
Thank you for your time. This has been another episode of the Never Quit podcast with Lainie Hodges in the studio, sponsored and hosted by Quotes Jungle. Hope you enjoyed your time and learned some productive information. Peace.
The Never Quit podcast, sponsored and hosted by Quotes Jungle, with your host, Quote.